The Act of Union 1801 united Ireland and Britain under one government. The cultures of both countries were very different. Ireland was composed of mostly farmers who were tenants of Anglo-Irish or English landlords. There were very few cities in Ireland. The agricultural and industrial revolutions of Britain meant England had become industrialised and urbanised. At the beginning of the 19th century, Ireland's population was 5.5 million. Aside from a few parts of the northeast of the country, Ireland had very few factories, and Ireland did not have coal or iron reserves, nor did Ireland use steam engines to the extent that Britain did. Ulster was the thriving industrial province in Ireland, with a hold on the textile industry. Irish lace and linen were considered to be among the best in the world, and large quantities were transported through Belfast port. Shipbuilding began in the 1790s and flourished. Belfast began to grow rich and was the largest city in Ireland by the 1850s. Dublin had few industries. Wool and breweries were the main industries. After the Union, many of the wealthy left Dublin for London, and they sold their houses. These houses were turned into tenement buildings. A tenement was a building that housed many families in separate rooms, and they were overcrowded and unsanitary. The poorest of the poor in Ireland faced the same difficulties regardless of where they were: overcrowding, sewage overflow, disease and unemployment. In 1841, over 70% of the Irish population lived in the countryside, and the population grew rapidly. Food was plentiful due to improvements in farming methods, and many Irish people tended to marry young and have large families as a result of lack of contraception at the time. Ireland exported most of their livestock and food to Britain. There was no real effort by those in charge to develop industry in Ireland in the same way it had occurred in Britain. Those in power claimed that it would be better for Ireland if it continued to be one of the main exporters of food to Britain. After the Union came into effect, Ireland's own Parliament ceased to exist, and Ireland now sent 100 members of Parliament, or MPs, to the House of Commons in Westminster. Laws passed in Britain would apply to Ireland too. The Lord Lieutenant, who represented the King in Ireland, lived in Dublin Castle. The Catholic question was the main political issue in Ireland at the beginning of the Union. Most Catholics supported the Act of Union because the British government had promised to abolish the penal laws and grant full Catholic emancipation. This meant that Catholics could sit in Parliament. However, they would have to swear an oath of loyalty to the King of England as the head of the Church. And as no Catholic could swear this oath due to the Pope being the head of the Catholic Church, Irish Catholic MPs could not take their seats even if they were elected. Catholics were forced to pay money or a tithe to the Protestant Church of Ireland, which they resented. Many Catholics were becoming middle class as large farmers and merchants, and they were educated and wealthy. They demanded change. Daniel O'Connell was an important figure in Irish history. He founded the Catholic Board in 1811 to campaign for Catholic emancipation. It had little effect until he founded the Catholic Association in 1823 to campaign for emancipation, end to the tithe payments to the Church of Ireland, and increased rights for tenant farmers. Money was raised and used to fund the campaign, support pro-emancipation MPs, pay legal costs of those arrested for campaigning, and pay for publicity material. In 1828, O'Connell ran for election and won his seat. He refused to take the oath, and as a result, he could not take his seat. The Duke of Wellington, the Prime Minister at the time, who was born in Ireland, feared rebellion in Ireland and encouraged Parliament to pass the Emancipation Act of 1829. Because of this, O'Connell was able to take his seat. He became known as the Liberator in Ireland, and King George IV even referred to him as the King of Ireland due to his popularity and power. In the 1830s, he managed to get the cost of the tithe payments reduced and paid to landlords instead of the church. In 1830, O'Connell set up the Repeal Association, which campaigned for the abolition of the Act of Union. Huge gatherings of those who supported the end of the Union took place throughout the 1830s and early 1840s. Many of these gatherings were attended by over 100,000 people. The British government grew concerned and banned one in 1843. Many wanted to defy the ban, but O'Connell feared violence would occur and called off the meeting. This led to a split in the movement. By 1845, Ireland's population was 8.2 million. Most land in Ireland was owned by landlords, and most Irish people rented and farmed the land. They were known as tenant farmers. Farmers grew different kinds of tillage, including vegetables, wheat, barley, and potatoes. Cottagers were labourers who rented 1 acre of land from the tenant farmers and paid their rent by working for the farmer. They lived in a 1-room thatched cottage with their families and grew potatoes. In 1845, a potato blight swept throughout Europe. Though other countries were affected by the blight, Ireland was hit the hardest because other countries were able to rely on other sources of food, whereas many in Ireland could not. The potato crop failed. Other crops managed to survive, but because they were being sent abroad, the Irish poor had no crops to survive on. People were reliant on potatoes to survive. Potatoes were nutritious and cheap to grow. They could grow under any circumstances and were plentiful. 1 acre of land could grow enough food to feed an entire family for 6 months. The poor sustained themselves on potatoes. As cottagers worked in exchange for a place to live and for food, they had no cash to buy alternative food sources. Most of the potatoes were rotten. However, many potatoes were stored during an earlier harvest, so mass starvation was not an issue in 1845. In 1846, 2/3 of the crop was lost, and people had used up the last of their stores. The poorest began to starve, and disease began to spread quickly due to their weakened immune systems. In 1847, there was virtually no blight. However, people had very few seeds to plant potatoes, and the crop that was produced was very small. The poor continued to die of hunger and disease. Between 1848 and 1850, starvation and disease worsened. Typhus and cholera killed many due to the bad living conditions and dirty water. People moving to towns brought disease with them, and it spread like wildfire. Many tenant farmers and cottagers were evicted from their homes. Their cottages were burned and roofs were pulled in to prevent tenants from returning. Some landlords took pity on their tenants and reduced rents or even let people stay for no rent at all. A few even paid for their tenants to emigrate abroad. Those who emigrated faced a difficult journey. The ships they boarded were called coffin ships, because so many died while on board from illness or starvation. During the course of the famine, the middle and upper classes were virtually untouched by disease, homelessness, and starvation. Help from abroad was slow to arrive. The British government took a laissez-faire approach. Essentially, let it be. They believed that they should not interfere as the Irish would correct it themselves. They also did not want to provide assistance as they believed if they did give handouts, the Irish would become lazy and would not work. British farmers had other crops and they did not depend on potatoes as their sole source of food, so the British government thought it was the same in Ireland. They believed it would only last less than a year, and they continued to export crops from Ireland into Britain. Some help came, but by then it was too late for many. In November 1845, Prime Minister Sir Robert Peel sent aid in the form of maize. It was enough to feed 1 million people for 1 month, and was offered at a price. Many could not afford to buy the maize. Public works schemes were set up. People were paid to build roads, walls, or bridges. By 1846, 400,000 people had signed up. But the work was physically hard, and they earned barely anything, certainly not enough to pay for food. Workhouses were also established. A workhouse was a large building where people worked in return for house and board. Entire families could enter together. However, most ended up never leaving. The work was purposefully harsh, to discourage people from entering. However, most workhouses ended up being overcrowded because of the workhouses together could only accommodate 100,000 people. By 1847, over 200,000 people had entered the workhouses. Many contracted diseases while there and died. In 1846, the Quakers set up soup kitchens, and they gave out soup to people who were not working in workhouses. In mid-1847, the British government set up their own soup kitchens. The Quakers raised international awareness of the severity of what was happening, and donations came from at least 19 different countries. Queen Victoria sent the equivalent of €172,000 in today's money, and the Pope also sent €19,000 in today's money from his own income. Even the Choctaw Nation, who were displaced from their own homeland in southern USA and had suffered their own loss of life, raised money for those starving in Ireland. In remembrance of the compassion of the Choctaw Nation, a memorial has been installed in County Cork called Kindred Spirits. The impact of the famine is still felt in Ireland today. The Irish still emigrate abroad during times of economic hardship. The Irish have sought livelihoods outside of farming. There is a strong tradition of owning your own home and land, and the entire population of Ireland, Republic and Northern Ireland combined, has never reached pre-famine levels. While potato blight was caused by an airborne pathogen that destroyed the potato crop, British rule in Ireland ultimately led to the deaths of 1 million people. The inaction and prejudice of the British government resulted in the deaths of not only people, but almost resulted in the death of the Irish language and culture, and changed the psyche of Irish people forever.